What would you do if the person who broke your heart suddenly reappeared, demanding a place in your life? Emma thought she had finally moved on from the day that changed everything. 5 years of building a new life. 5 years of unexpected joy and countless sleepless nights. But one chance encounter at a park threatens to unravel it all. Now Emma faces an impossible choice that will affect not just her future, but the futures of 4 innocent lives caught in the middle. Some mistakes can't be undone. Or can they? Where are you watching from? This story of betrayal, love, and second chances will make you question everything you thought you knew about forgiveness. Hit subscribe and like now to discover if some bonds are truly unbreakable. Emma Wilson stood in the empty church, her wedding dress a brilliant white against the dimming afternoon light. 300 guests had come and gone, whispering as they filed out. The flowers, carefully selected months ago, still perfumed the air with a sweetness that now seemed cruel. Her phone vibrated in her clutched purse. Another sympathetic message, no doubt. But the one call she desperately wanted would never come. David Parker wasn't coming. "We need to leave, Emma," Amanda whispered, her best friend's hand gentle, on her shoulder. "The staff needs to clean up. Clean up." As if this disaster could be swept away like fallen petals. Emma nodded, unable to speak. As they walked toward the back entrance, she couldn't bear to walk down that center aisle alone. She caught a glimpse of movement through the stained glass. A black luxury car idled at the edge of the property. "Is that—" Amanda began. "Yes," Emma said, her voice surprisingly steady. "It's him." She pushed open the heavy wooden door and stepped outside. Across the parking lot, David sat behind the wheel, his face partially obscured but unmistakable. Their eyes met through the windshield, a moment stretched into eternity, before he looked away and the car pulled silently onto the street. That single look contained everything: shame, regret, and something worse, relief. He was relieved to have escaped. "Let's go," Emma said, turning away. That night, surrounded by unpacked wedding gifts in her apartment, Emma made a decision. She'd always been defined by practical action in the face of adversity. It was how she'd survived being orphaned at 15, worked her way through nursing school, built her life piece by careful piece. This would be no different. By dawn, she had packed a single suitcase, written resignation letters, and booked a flight to Portland, a city where nobody knew her name, her story, or her shame. A city where she could rebuild again. 6 weeks later, Emma's new routine was interrupted by persistent morning sickness. The pregnancy test was positive. The doctor's revelation, however, was staggering. 4 distinct gestational sacs, Dr. Martinez said, pointing to the ultrasound screen. "You're carrying quadruplets, Emma." The room seemed to spin around her. "That's approximately 1 in 700,000 pregnancies," Emma whispered, her medical training briefly overriding her shock. "Yes. You're looking at something extraordinarily rare." Emma laughed suddenly, a sound that contained no humor. "Extraordinary has been the theme of my life lately." That evening, Emma sat at her small kitchen table, staring at her laptop screen. The cursor blinked at the end of a carefully composed email to David. Attached were the ultrasound images and a simple, direct message informing him of the quadruplets. Her finger hovered over send, trembling slightly. She didn't want his money or even his involvement if he couldn't be fully committed. But these children deserved to know their father existed, and he deserved to know they existed. It was the ethical choice, regardless of her feelings. She pressed send. Days passed, then weeks, no response came. "He's made his choice," Emma told Amanda over the phone. Again. What Emma couldn't know was that Jessica Davis, David's executive assistant and new girlfriend, had intercepted the email, deleting it before David ever saw it. Jessica had been orchestrating small manipulations for months, even before the wedding. A cancelled reservation here, a misplaced message there, culminating in showing David fabricated evidence of Emma's infidelity the night before the wedding. Combined with Elizabeth Parker's relentless insistence that Emma was merely after the family fortune, it had been enough to break David's already wavering resolve. As Emma's pregnancy progressed, complications arose. Her doctor ordered bed rest at 5 months, forcing her to leave her nursing position. Amanda moved temporarily to Portland to help, but money grew tight. The apartment became a fortress of medical supplies, pregnancy books, and increasingly desperate budget spreadsheets. The babies arrived at 30 weeks. 4 tiny, perfect boys who required 6 weeks in the NICU. Emma named them Ethan, Mason, Jackson, and William. During those endless hospital days, she met Jennifer Roberts, a family law attorney who took interest in her case. "They have rights to support from their father," Jennifer insisted one day after hearing Emma's story. "And just as importantly, he has a right to know them, regardless of what happened between you two." "He knows," Emma said flatly. "He chose not to respond." "Let me contact him formally," Jennifer pressed, "through proper legal channels. If he rejects his children, then at least you'll have done everything possible." Emma eventually agreed. The legal notification was dispatched to the Parker family attorneys in New York. David Parker was in a board meeting when his assistant brought in the envelope marked "Urgent Legal Matter." As he scanned the document, his face drained of color. 4 children. His children, already 6 months old. The world he'd carefully reconstructed after Emma tilted on its axis. Since the wedding disaster, he'd thrown himself into his work, expanded the business into socially responsible ventures, and maintained a cordial but emotionally distant relationship with Jessica. His mother's approval, once so desperately sought, now felt hollow. David cancelled his meetings, went directly to his penthouse, packed a small bag and booked the first flight to Portland. No strategy, no lawyers, no preparation. Just a desperate need to understand how he could have 4 children he knew nothing about. On a quiet Sunday morning, he knocked on the door of a modest suburban home. When it opened, Emma stood there, with a baby in her arms, a child with David's distinctive green eyes. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice breaking. Emma's confusion was genuine. "I did. I emailed you months ago. You chose not to respond." Something clicked in David's mind. The technical issues with his personal email that Jessica had mentioned, the communication problems that had become routine. An awful suspicion began to form. "May I come in?" he asked quietly. Emma stepped aside, revealing a living room where 3 more babies played in a colorful playpen. The emotional impact buckled David's knees, and he sank onto the nearest chair. "Their names?" he managed to ask. "Ethan, Mason, Jackson, and William," Emma replied, studying his reaction carefully. The raw emotion on his face wasn't something that could be faked. "Could I hold them?" Emma hesitated, then nodded. One by one, she introduced the boys to their father. Ethan studied David's face with intense curiosity. Mason grabbed his expensive tie with impressive strength. Jackson immediately smiled at him. William, the quietest, simply gazed at David with those identical green eyes. "I never knew," David whispered, tears streaming down his face. "I swear to you, Emma, I never knew." 3 days after David's unexpected appearance, Emma agreed to meet him at a quiet cafe near her home. The quadruplets were with Amanda, giving them space for an honest conversation, something long overdue. David arrived early, nervously, arranging and rearranging the sugar packets. When Emma entered, he stood too quickly, nearly knocking over his chair. She noticed the dark circles under his eyes, the rumpled quality of his usually immaculate clothing. "Thank you for coming," he began. "This isn't about us," Emma clarified immediately, sliding into the seat across from him. "This is about what's best for the boys." David nodded, accepting this boundary. "I've spoken with Jessica," he said. "She admitted to deleting your email, among other manipulations." "And your mother?" Emma asked, her voice carefully neutral. A flash of anger crossed David's face. "She knew nothing about the babies, but she had plenty to do with what happened at the wedding. I've told her I'm taking an indefinite leave from the company. My priority now is to know my sons." Emma wrapped her hands around her mug. "What exactly are you proposing, David?" He slid a folder across the table. "Financial support, obviously, but that's the least of it. I want to be part of their lives, really part of their lives. I've rented a house 10 minutes from yours. I'm prepared to split childcare responsibilities, midnight feedings, doctor appointments, everything. Emma opened the folder, scanning the documents inside. Beyond the generous financial provisions, David had outlined a co-parenting schedule that demonstrated significant research into child development and multiple birth challenges. You did all this in 3 days? I haven't slept much, he admitted. I've spent every waking hour researching, learning, preparing. I know I have no right to ask for anything, but I'm asking anyway. Let me be their father. Emma closed the ID folder. And what happens when you get bored with midnight crying and diaper changes? When you remember your comfortable life in New York? When your mother disapproves of this arrangement? I'll be here, David said simply. Every day, every night, every milestone. My mother's opinion no longer dictates my choices. As for New York, I've already contacted a real estate agent to find office space here. I'm relocating permanently. Such an extreme change is exactly what's needed, David interrupted. I failed you in the most public, humiliating way possible. I won't fail my sons. Emma studied him for a long moment. All right, she finally said. We'll try your co-parenting plan with modifications. Name them. First, this remains a parenting relationship only. What happened between Gus stays in the past. David nodded, though something flickered in his eyes. Second, no overnight visits until they're at least a year old. They need consistency right now. Agreed. Third, we make all major decisions together. Medical, educational, everything. Of course. Emma hesitated before adding, and Elizabeth is not to have unsupervised time with them until I feel comfortable with her involvement. David didn't hesitate. Absolutely. They spent the next 2 hours refining the agreement, discussing schedules, preferences, and boundaries. By the time they left the cafe, they had created a framework for their new reality, one built on the needs of 4 small boys rather than the complicated emotions of their parents. 2 days later, Elizabeth Parker arrived in Portland unannounced, installing herself at the finest hotel in the city. Her plan was straightforward: offer Emma enough money to disappear with the children, severing David's connection to this unfortunate situation. She requested a meeting with Emma through her assistant. Emma agreed to meet at a public restaurant, her attorney Jennifer present as well. Elizabeth arrived elegantly dressed, her smile practiced but cold. I appreciate you meeting with me. Ms. Wilson, Elizabeth began after they were seated. I'll be direct. Your situation with 4 infants must be overwhelming, especially financially. We're managing, Emma replied calmly. Elizabeth nodded sympathetically. Of course. But imagine providing them with every advantage. The finest schools, travel, opportunities beyond what a nurse's salary could afford. She slid an envelope across the table. $5 million. In exchange, you relocate outside the country with the children. A clean break for everyone. Jennifer started to speak, but Emma placed a hand on her arm. Mrs. Parker, Emma said, quietly. There isn't enough money in the world to make me deprive my sons of their father or to leave the country I've made my home. Elizabeth's expression hardened. Then perhaps we should discuss custody arrangements through less pleasant means. My resources are considerable. The courts tend to favor stable, 2-parent households with significant financial backing. Are you threatening me? Emma asked, her voice steady. I'm being realistic, Elizabeth countered. A single mother of quadruplets, working long hours. With limited financial resources, it wouldn't be difficult to build a case for primary custody to go to David, with generous visitation for you. Before Emma could respond, David appeared at the table, his expression thunderous. He had been alerted by Eleanor, his family's longtime housekeeper, who had secretly contacted him after overhearing Elizabeth's plans. That's enough, Mother, he said firmly. You will never again threaten the mother of my children. Elizabeth faltered momentarily. David, I'm only trying to protect. No, he interrupted. You're trying to control. It stops today. Emma and I have a co-parenting agreement that works for our family. You can either accept it and be part of your grandchildren's lives on our terms, or you can return to New York and have no relationship with them at all. Elizabeth looked between them, assessing the unified front they unexpectedly presented. For the first time in her life, she recognized she might have overplayed her hand. "I see," she said, gathering her purse. "Perhaps I've been hasty." She stood, her composure regained. "I'll extend my stay in Portland. We should discuss this further when tempers have cooled." After she departed, David turned to Emma. "I'm sorry. I had no idea she would do this." "Didn't you?" Emma asked, gathering her things. "This is who she's always been." "Yes," David acknowledged, "but it's not who I am anymore, or at least not who I'm trying to be." Emma nodded, allowing a small smile. "That's the first promising thing I've heard you say." 3 months after establishing their co-parenting arrangement, Emma received an invitation that made her stomach knot. David's company was hosting a charity gala for pediatric medical research, and as the mother of his children, her presence was requested. It would be their first public appearance together since the wedding that never happened. "I can't do this," Emma told Amanda, pacing her living room. The quadruplets, now 9 months old, watched from their play area, fascinated by her movement. "You can," Amanda insisted. "You've faced worse. Besides, it's for pediatric research, your field. People will talk. There will be speculation, gossip." "There already is," Amanda pointed out pragmatically. "At least this way, you control the narrative." The night of the gala, David arrived to pick her up in a sleek car, his expression nervous but hopeful. Emma emerged from the house in a simple emerald gown, elegant without being ostentatious. "You look beautiful," he said quietly. "Thank you," she replied, smoothing non-existent wrinkles. "Just to be clear about tonight, we're presenting a united front for the children and your business interests, nothing more." David nodded. "Of course, though I should warn you, my mother will be there." "I assumed as much." The drive was silent, tension building with each mile. As they approached the venue, Emma noticed David's white-knuckled grip on the steering wheel. "This is harder for you than for me, isn't it?" she asked suddenly. David glanced at her, surprised. "These people were at our wedding, or rather, at our non-wedding. I haven't faced most of them since that day. Why did you invite me then? Surely it would be easier to attend alone." He pulled into the valet area before answering. "Because hiding you or the boys feels like being ashamed of the best things in my life right now. I'm not ashamed, Emma. I'm proud of what we're building together for our sons." The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. Before she could respond, the valet opened her door and the moment slipped away. Inside, the ballroom glittered with chandeliers and the jewelry of Manhattan's elite. Conversations stuttered as they entered, heads turning, whispers beginning. Emma felt her chest tighten. "Dr. Lawrence is here," David murmured, guiding her with a light touch to her back. "The pediatric researcher I mentioned. I thought you might enjoy speaking with her." Emma appreciated his thoughtfulness, giving her a purpose beyond standing awkwardly at his side. Dr. Lawrence proved fascinating, discussing innovative treatments for premature infants that resonated with Emma's experience with the quadruplets. Soon she was engaged in meaningful conversation, momentarily forgetting the curious stares. Across the room, Elizabeth Parker watched with narrowed eyes as her son moved confidently through the crowd with Emma at his side. Though publicly she maintained a facade of acceptance, privately she was still working to separate them. Her newest ally in this effort was Jessica Davis, who had been quietly feeding her information despite being removed from her position at Parker Industries. "Mrs. Parker," Jessica greeted, approaching with calculated deference. "They make quite the picture, don't they? So convincing." "Indeed," Elizabeth replied coolly. "Have you found anything useful?" Jessica smiled thinly. "Perhaps." Emma's been communicating with a doctor in Boston, a specialist in pediatric cardiology. One of the babies might have a heart condition they're keeping quiet. Elizabeth absorbed this information, already calculating how it might be leveraged. "Continue monitoring the situation. If there are medical issues, we need to know exactly what they are." Meanwhile, Emma had been introduced to several hospital administrators who were impressed by her insights on neonatal care. One offered her a business card, mentioning possible consulting opportunities. "Your girlfriend is quite impressive," one board member commented to David. Not at all what the rumors suggested. "Emma is my children's mother and my co-parent," David corrected firmly. "And yes, she's one of the most capable people I know." The comment reached Emma's ears, just as Elizabeth approached their group. "David, darling, you've been monopolizing Emma all evening," Elizabeth said smoothly. "Perhaps I could borrow her for a moment. We have so much to discuss about the children." Emma hesitated, then nodded. "Of course." They moved to a quieter corner, where Elizabeth's pleasant expression immediately cooled. "You're playing this very skillfully. I underestimated you." "I'm not playing anything, Mrs. Parker. I'm here supporting pediatric research and maintaining a civil relationship with my children's father." "My son seems to think you walk on water," Elizabeth observed. "Quite a turnaround from a man who left you at the altar." Emma met her gaze steadily. "David and I have moved past that for the sake of our children." "Have you? How convenient." Elizabeth sipped her champagne. "You should know that Jessica still has friends at the company. Nothing stays private for long." Before Emma could respond, David appeared at her side. "Everything all right here?" "Perfectly pleasant," Elizabeth assured him. "I was just telling Emma how wonderful it is to see her so well received by everyone." David's expression made it clear he didn't believe this for a second. "The hospital director was looking for you, Mother. Something about the family donation." After Elizabeth reluctantly departed, David turned to Emma. "I'm sorry, we can leave if you want." Emma was about to agree when she spotted Jessica across the room, watching them intently. Something shifted in her perspective. Running away would only feed the narrative that she didn't belong here. "Actually," she said, straightening her shoulders, "I was just about to get a drink. Would you like one?" Relief crossed David's face. "I would. And afterward, I'd love to introduce you to our pediatric oncology team. Your experience with the NICU could be valuable to their patient support program." As they moved through the crowd together, Emma noticed something unexpected in professional conversations. David consistently highlighted her expertise, giving her space to speak rather than speaking for her. It was a small thing, but significant. By the end of the evening, Emma had collected several business cards and made connections that could prove valuable for her career. More importantly, she'd stood her ground in a world that had once rejected her. In the car ride home, David broke their comfortable silence. "Thank you for coming tonight. It meant a lot." "It wasn't as terrible as I expected," Emma admitted, "though your mother and Jessica are clearly still in communication." David's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "I know. I've asked security to monitor Jessica's access to company communications, but she has personal relationships with several staff members. As for my mother," he sighed, "she's playing a longer game." "She mentioned Boston," Emma said carefully. "She seems to know about William's appointment with the cardiologist." David's sharp intake of breath confirmed her suspicion. "That was supposed to be confidential. Only you, me, and Dr. Martinez knew about that. And whoever has access to our email or phone records," Emma pointed out. They pulled into her driveway, both lost in thought. The lights inside indicated Amanda was still up with the babies. "We need to be more careful," David said finally. "Use different channels for important communications, especially about the boys." Emma nodded, then hesitated before asking, "Do you think William's condition is something they would use against us?" "Against you, specifically," David corrected grimly. "To suggest you can't provide adequate care for a child with special medical needs." The thought chilled Emma. She'd been so focused on building their co-parenting relationship that she'd underestimated the external threats to it. "We'll protect them," David said firmly, reading her expression. "All of them. Together." As he walked her to the door, Emma realized something had fundamentally shifted that evening. For the first time since the wedding disaster, she and David were truly united, not just as co-parents but as allies against anyone who threatened their unconventional family. William's cardiologist appointment revealed a minor heart murmur, concerning but treatable. Emma and David decided to tell no one except Amanda and Dr. Martinez, communicating only through an encrypted messaging app David had installed on their phones. The secrecy felt extreme, but Elizabeth's veiled threats lingered in their minds. What they couldn't anticipate was Jessica's determination. Frustrated by her diminishing access to company information, she focused instead on Emma's professional life. Through a former colleague at the hospital, she discovered that Emma was being considered for a prestigious position in the pediatric department, a promotion that would mean longer hours and a more demanding schedule. It was the leverage Elizabeth had been waiting for. If Emma's work commitments increased significantly, they could argue that the quadruplets' needs were being neglected. The strategy was simple: support Emma's career advancement publicly while documenting every minute she spent away from the children. The plan might have worked if not for Eleanor Brown, the Parker family's longtime housekeeper who had grown increasingly disturbed by Elizabeth's behavior. Having helped raise David, from infancy, her loyalty ultimately lay with him rather than his mother. When she overheard Elizabeth discussing strategy with Jessica in the hotel suite, she made a difficult decision. On a rainy Tuesday morning, Eleanor requested a meeting with David at his Portland office. Nervously twisting her hands, she revealed everything she knew about Elizabeth and Jessica's ongoing schemes. "They're planning something at the hospital benefit next week," Eleanor explained. "Jessica has been in contact with someone on the board, a Dr. Richards. They're going to announce Emma's promotion publicly before she's formally accepted it, trying to force her hand." David's expression darkened. "Thank you, Eleanor. You've been more loyal to this family than some who share our name." After she left, David sat at his desk, considering his options. The simplest approach would be to warn Emma, but that would only address the immediate threat, not the underlying one. His mother and Jessica would simply find another angle. No, this required a more definitive solution. He called his security team, authorizing a complete investigation into Jessica's activities since before the wedding. Then he contacted his attorney about restraining orders and legal options to protect his family. Finally, he made the most difficult call, to Emma. "We need to talk," he said when she answered. "Not about the boys, about Jessica and my mother." They met that evening after the quadruplets were asleep, Amanda keeping watch while they sat at Emma's kitchen table. David explained everything Eleanor had revealed, watching the emotions cross Emma's face: shock, anger, and finally, resignation. "I shouldn't be surprised," she said, "but I am. The lengths they're willing to go to—" "It needs to end," David stated firmly. "I have a plan, but I'll need your help, and it will mean exposing some painful truths for both of us." Emma studied him for a moment. "What kind of truths?" "Everything," David said simply. "Why I didn't show up at the wedding, the manipulations that led to it, my own cowardice, all of it. To what end? To show them, and everyone else, that their power over us exists only because we allow it to." He leaned forward. "I'm tired of hiding, Emma. Tired of letting them dictate the terms of our lives through fear and manipulation." Emma considered his words. "The benefit is in 3 days. What exactly are you proposing?" David outlined his plan, a counter-move, so public and definitive that it would neutralize Elizabeth and Jessica's influence permanently. It was bold, potentially embarrassing, and absolutely necessary. "You realize your mother may never forgive you," Emma cautioned. "I'm beginning to think that might be a blessing," David replied. The night of the hospital benefit arrived, the ballroom filled with Portland's medical community and social elite. Elizabeth Parker made a grand entrance, playing the role of the benevolent donor while scanning the crowd for Emma. Jessica, attending as the guest of Dr. Richards, positioned herself near the stage where announcements would be made. Their plan was proceeding perfectly until David took the stage unexpectedly, requesting the microphone from the hospital director. "Good evening," he began, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "Many of you know me as David Parker, CEO of Parker Industries and tonight's primary sponsor. But I'm here speaking as a father and as a man who has made terrible mistakes." A murmur went through the crowd. Near the back, Emma stood with Jennifer at her side, her expression calm despite her pounding heart. "Last year, I left Emma Wilson at the altar," David continued, his voice carrying through the now silent room. "I allowed myself to be manipulated by people I trusted. led to believe lies about the woman I loved. It was the greatest mistake of my life, one I've been working to atone for since discovering I'm the father of her quadruplet sons. Gasps and whispers rippled through the audience. Elizabeth's face had gone deathly pale. Since reuniting with Emma to co-parent our children, certain individuals have continued attempting to separate us through manipulation and threats. David's gaze found Jessica in the crowd, then moved to his mother. Tonight, I'm declaring that these efforts end now. I've filed restraining orders against Jessica Davis, my former assistant, for her continued harassment, and I'm publicly asking my mother, Elizabeth Parker, to either accept our family as it exists or remove herself from our lives entirely. Elizabeth swayed slightly, gripping a nearby chair for support. Jessica had already begun edging toward the exit. Emma Wilson is an extraordinary mother to our sons and a gifted medical professional. Any attempt to undermine her in either capacity will be met with the full legal and financial resources at my disposal. David's voice softened. I failed Emma once through weakness. I won't fail her or our children again. He stepped away from the microphone to stunned silence, then steady applause began to build. As David made his way through the crowd toward Emma, Elizabeth intercepted him, her voice a furious whisper. How dare you humiliate me publicly? Everything I've done has been to protect you. No, Mother, David replied calmly. Everything you've done has been to control me. There's a difference. He moved past her to where Emma stood. I'm sorry if that was too much, he said quietly. But half measures wouldn't have worked. Emma studied his face, seeing something there she hadn't fully recognized before. Not just regret or determination, but a fundamental change in how he carried himself. The man before her was not the same one who had left her at the altar. It was exactly what was needed, she assured him, though I think your mother might be having a medical emergency. They turned to see Elizabeth being assisted to a chair, her breathing rapid. David immediately signaled for medical help. Later that night, after Elizabeth had been treated for what turned out to be an anxiety attack and discharged, David and Emma sat in her living room, the events of the evening, hanging between them. Will you tell me now, Emma asked. The whole truth about the wedding day? David took a deep breath. Jessica showed me fabricated text messages the night before, conversations that appeared to be between you and an ex-boyfriend. They were convincing enough to plant doubt. Then my mother arrived with evidence that you'd been in contact with tabloids, planning to sell stories about the family after the wedding. And you believed them, Emma said, the old hurt surfacing briefly. I wanted not to, David admitted. But it played into every insecurity I had, that you were too good to be true, that someone like you couldn't possibly love someone like me for myself rather than my position. I never cared about your money, David. I know that now. He met her gaze directly. But the man I was then cared so much about appearances, about my mother's approval, about maintaining the Parker image, that I couldn't see what was genuine. It took losing everything that actually mattered to recognize how hollow my life had been. Emma absorbed his words, recognizing the cost of his public declaration. What happens now? With your mother, the company. Mother will either adapt or she won't. The company will continue with or without her input. David hesitated before adding, As for us, I'm not asking for anything, Emma. You've been clear about the boundaries of our relationship, and I respect that. Tonight wasn't about trying to win you back. It was about creating a safe space for our family to exist without constant threats. Emma nodded slowly. It's a good start. In the nursery, one of the quadruplets began to cry. Both parents rose automatically. Their conversation paused, but not finished. Something fundamental had shifted between them. A layer of distrust dissolved by brutal honesty. The truth had finally been exposed, not just about the past, but about who they were becoming through the crucible of co-parenting 4 small boys against formidable opposition. The path forward remained uncertain, but for the first time, they were walking it with complete transparency between them. The weeks following David's public declaration brought significant changes. Elizabeth returned to New York, maintaining a stiff formal relationship with David through carefully worded emails. Jessica, facing potential legal consequences for her actions, accepted a settlement that required her to relocate to the West Coast and sever all contact with the Parker family. More subtle were the changes in David and Emma's co-parenting relationship. The walls of caution Emma had maintained began to thin, allowing tentative friendship to develop in the spaces where distrust had once lived. As the quadruplets approached their first birthday, Emma received exciting news. She'd been offered the hospital position she wanted with scheduling accommodations for her unique family situation. When she called David to discuss how this would affect their parenting arrangement, his response surprised her. "Let's celebrate," he suggested. "Just us. Dinner somewhere nice. You deserve to mark this achievement." Emma hesitated only briefly before agreeing. They arranged for Amanda to watch the boys, and David picked Emma up in casual attire rather than his usual business suit, another subtle shift in their dynamic. The restaurant was small and unpretentious, tucked away on a side street. No Parker family connections, no hospital administrators, no audience of any kind. Just two people sharing a meal and conversation that, for once, wasn't centered entirely on their children. "Tell me something I don't know about you," David said as they waited for their entrees. "Something from before we met." Emma considered the question. "I lived in my car for 3 months during nursing school when my scholarship housing fell through. I didn't tell anyone, just showered at the gym and studied in the library until it closed each night." David's expression registered shock, then admiration. "That's incredible determination." "It was survival," Emma corrected. "I'd been on my own since my parents died. There was no safety net, no one to call for help. Moving forward was the only option." "Is that why you never told me about your financial struggles when we were together? You were used to handling everything alone." Emma nodded slowly. "Partly that, partly pride, and partly fear that if you knew how close to the edge I'd lived, you might see me differently." "I would have," David acknowledged honestly. "But not in the way you feared. I would have understood why certain things mattered to you more than they did to me." He smiled ruefully. "I might have been less of an entitled ass about trivial inconveniences." Emma laughed, the sound genuine and unguarded. "Your turn. Tell me something I don't know about you." David was quiet for a moment. "I wanted to be an architect originally. I spent my childhood drawing buildings, creating spaces in my imagination. My room was filled with sketchpads and drafting tools. What happened? My father happened." David's expression grew distant. He sat me down on my 16th birthday and explained that Parker men run Parker Industries. There was no discussion, no acknowledgement of my interests. It was simply the way things were. "And you accepted that?" "I did what Parker men do. I buried my own desires and stepped into the role assigned to me." His smile was tinged with sadness. "Drawing buildings became something I did in private, a hobby I never discussed. Eventually, I stopped altogether." Emma studied him across the table, seeing layers she'd never fully recognized before. "Do you regret it, not pursuing architecture?" "I used to," David replied thoughtfully. "But lately I've been thinking about how we can shape the company to create sustainable housing initiatives, community spaces that serve real needs. Perhaps there's a way to merge who I was expected to be with who I might have become." Their conversation continued through dinner, each revelation creating new dimensions to their understanding of each other. It wasn't until they were sharing dessert that Emma realized they'd spent 2 hours talking without once checking their phones for updates about the quadruplets. "We should probably call Amanda," she said, suddenly self-conscious. "We should," David agreed, but neither moved. To do so immediately. "This was nice," Emma admitted. "I'd forgotten what it feels like to just be a person, not only a mother or a nurse or someone's ex-fiancée." "We could do it again sometime," David suggested carefully. "If you wanted to." Emma met his gaze. "I think I might." The drive home was comfortable, filled with easy conversation. When they arrived at Emma's house, David walked her to the door, just as he had on their very first date years ago. "Thank you," Emma said, keys in hand, "for tonight and for your support with the job." "You earned that position on your own merit," David replied. "I'm just glad I get to witness you receiving the recognition you deserve." There was a moment, brief but unmistakable, when the air between them shifted. Years ago, this would have been when he kissed her good night. The memory hung between them, acknowledged but not acted upon. "Good night, David," Emma said softly, breaking the moment. "Good night, Emma." Inside, Emma found Amanda dozing on the couch, all four boys sleeping soundly in their room. As she gently woke her friend, Amanda blinked sleepily before asking, "How was your date?" "It wasn't a date," Emma corrected automatically. "Just dinner." Amanda raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. "Whatever you say. But for what it's worth, you're smiling in a way I haven't seen in a very long time." That night, as Emma checked on each sleeping boy before going to bed herself, she allowed herself to acknowledge a truth she'd been avoiding. The wall she'd built around her heart had served its purpose during a time when protection was necessary. But perhaps, just perhaps, it was time to consider whether some carefully constructed openings might now be appropriate. The quadruplets' first birthday arrived with perfect spring weather. David had suggested combining their celebrations, a practical consideration given the logistics of managing 4 one-year-olds. The party was held in the backyard of his rented house, simple but thoughtfully planned. Close friends, favorite nurses from the NICU, and Jennifer attended. Notably absent was Elizabeth, though she had sent extravagant gifts with a formal card. As they watched the boys explore their cake, Ethan methodically, Mason enthusiastically, Jackson determinedly, William cautiously, David and Emma found themselves standing shoulder to shoulder, witnessing the miracle of their son's first year. "We did it," Emma said quietly. "1 year." "They did it," David corrected, smiling as Mason face-planted into his cake slice. "We just tried to keep up." Emma laughed, then impulsively reached for his hand, squeezing it briefly. "Thank you for being here, for all of it." David looked down at their joined hands, then at her face. "There's nowhere else I'd rather be." Later, after guests had departed and the quadruplets had been bathed and put to bed in the portable crib set up at David's house, Emma and David sat on the patio exhausted but content. "I've been thinking," David said, breaking the comfortable silence. "The lease on this house ends next month. I've been looking at properties more suitable for the boys as they grow." "Oh?" Emma tried to ignore the unexpected pang the thought of him moving caused. "There's a place about 10 minutes from yours. Enough yard for them to run, a bedroom for each boy eventually, good school district." He hesitated. "I'd like your input before making an offer. After all, they'll be spending significant time there." "Of course," Emma agreed. "Just let me know when you want to see it." David nodded, then added more hesitantly, "There's actually something else I wanted to discuss. I've been thinking about William's heart condition and the logistics of managing 4 growing boys between 2 households." Emma tensed slightly. "What about it?" "It's going to get more complicated as they get older. Different activities, friends, school events." David took a deep breath. "I wonder if we should consider living arrangements that would make co-parenting less fragmented." "Are you suggesting we move in together?" Emma asked, genuinely surprised. "Not exactly." David looked nervous now. "The property I mentioned actually has a guest house, completely separate with its own entrance and privacy, but close enough that the boys could move freely between both spaces without being shuttled back and forth." "A compound situation," Emma said slowly, considering the idea. "Only if you think it might work," David added quickly. "I understand it's unorthodox." Emma was quiet for a long moment. "It would make logistical sense," she finally acknowledged. "But it would also blur the boundaries we've established." "I know," David said simply. "I'm not suggesting it lightly, and I'd understand completely if you prefer maintaining separate spaces." Emma looked at him, really looked at the man who had become such an essential part of her daily life, who had transformed himself into a dedicated father against all expectations, who had publicly chosen his children over his mother's approval. "I'll think about it," she promised. "Let's see the property first." It was a small opening, not a commitment but not a refusal either. Another brick cautiously removed from the wall between them. The property David had found exceeded Emma's expectations. Situated on 2 acres of land, the main house was spacious but not ostentatious, with a warmth that immediately appealed to her. The guest house, connected by a stone path through carefully tended gardens, offered genuine privacy while remaining accessible. As they toured the grounds, Emma could easily envision the quadruplets playing in the sprawling yard, climbing the old oak tree, running between both houses freely. There was a stream at the property's edge, with a small wooden bridge that the boys would love when they were older. "What do you think?" David asked as they stood on the main house's back deck, watching a family of deer at the forest edge. "It's beautiful," Emma admitted. "More than I expected." "Does that mean you're considering the arrangement?" Emma turned to face him. "I am. But we need to be very clear about what this means and doesn't mean." David nodded. "Absolutely. This would be a co-parenting living arrangement only," Emma stated firmly. "The guest house would be my space, completely private. The main house yours. We'd share common areas for family time, meals when it makes sense. Of course. And we'd need to be explicit with the boys as they get older that this isn't a traditional family structure, but it's our family structure." David smiled slightly. "They're already growing up in an untraditional family, Emma. 4 identical brothers with parents who live separately but parent together. They'll understand that families come in many configurations." Emma couldn't argue with that logic. After further discussion about practicalities, she finally agreed. "Let's try it. If it doesn't work, we can reassess." The move took place shortly after the boys' first birthday. Emma maintained her smaller house as a rental property, a safety net she wasn't quite ready to relinquish. David respected this decision, understanding the security it represented to someone who had faced housing insecurity in her past. The transition was smoother than either had anticipated. The quadruplets, now taking their first tentative steps, delighted in the expanded space. Their personalities continued to differentiate: Ethan the thinker, Mason the artist, Jackson the athlete, William the gentle observer. Having both parents easily accessible seemed to provide them with a sense of security that manifested in increased confidence. 6 months into their new living arrangement, Emma received unexpected news. William's heart condition had improved significantly, no longer requiring the intensive monitoring they'd grown accustomed to. The relief was profound for both parents. That evening, after the boys were asleep, Emma found David sitting on the deck between their houses, gazing at the stars. She joined him, handing him a glass of wine as she settled into the adjacent chair. "I keep thinking about how differently this could have gone," she said quietly. "If Jennifer hadn't pushed me to send that legal notification, if you hadn't come to Portland immediately, if Eleanor hadn't warned you about your mother's plans," David considered this, "I believe I would have found my way to them eventually. Maybe not as quickly, but some connections are too important to remain severed. Is that what you believe? That some connections can't be permanently broken?" The question hung between them, laden with meaning beyond their children. "I do," David said simply, "though they might transform into something different than what they initially appeared to be." Emma sipped her wine, considering his words. "I've been thinking about forgiveness lately. Not just forgiving you, but forgiving myself for some of the walls I built." "What do you mean?" "After the wedding disaster, I told myself a story, that I'd been foolish to believe someone from your world could truly love someone from mine, that I'd ignored warning signs because I wanted so badly to believe in the fairy tale." Emma's voice was reflective rather than bitter. "It was easier than acknowledging that real people are complicated, that love is messy, that mistakes happen." "They do," David agreed softly. "Sometimes catastrophic ones." "The thing is," Emma continued, "holding on to that narrative kept me safe, but it also kept me from seeing how much you've changed, how much we've both changed." David turned to look at her, his expression open and vulnerable. "And what do you see now?" "A man who prioritizes his children above everything, who rebuilt himself when his world collapsed, who faces difficult truths instead of running from them." She met his gaze steadily. "A man I'm proud to co-parent with, regardless of our past." "Thank you," David said, his voice thick with emotion. "That means more than you know." They sat, in comfortable silence, watching fireflies emerge in the garden between their houses. Later, Emma would recognize this conversation as another pivotal moment, not because anything overtly changed between them, but because something fundamental shifted in how she viewed their shared history. As summer turned to fall, their unconventional family found its rhythm. Morning routines evolved naturally. Emma would arrive at the main house early, starting breakfast while David got the boys dressed. They'd eat together before Emma left for her hospital shifts, or David departed for his office. Evenings were shared family time, followed by bedtime routines they alternated managing. The quadruplets' vocabulary expanded rapidly, bringing new challenges and delights. Mama and Dada were joined by more specific demands: up, more, no, and each boy's unique approximation of his brother's names. They developed a twin language of sorts, communicating with each other through gestures and sounds that only they fully understood. In October, David received news that Elizabeth had suffered a minor stroke. Though their relationship remained strained, he immediately arranged to visit her in New York, torn between lingering anger and genuine concern. "Go," Emma urged when he hesitated to leave the boys. "They'll be fine for a few days. She's still your mother." David's absence created an unexpected emptiness in their daily routine. Emma found herself glancing toward his house in the evenings, missing their casual conversations on the deck. The boys asked for Dada repeatedly, confused by his absence. On the third night, after finally getting all 4 boys to sleep, Emma called David. "How is she?" "Recovering well physically," he answered, sounding exhausted. "Emotionally, it's complicated. She's been seeing a therapist, apparently, trying to understand her control issues, as she puts it. That's surprising." "Surprising doesn't begin to cover it," David agreed. "She asked about the boys, genuinely asked, not as a manipulation, and she wanted to see pictures. Actual pictures, not just the formal portraits she had commissioned." "That's progress," Emma acknowledged. "She also asked about you," David added more cautiously. "How you were doing with your position at the hospital. What did you tell her? The truth that you're exceptional at your job, just as you are at being our son's mother?" Emma felt an unexpected warmth at his words. "When will you be back?" "Tomorrow evening. Earlier if I can manage it." There was a pause before he added, "I miss them and I miss—" He stopped himself. "What?" Emma prompted. "Our talks," he finished. "The deck, wine under the stars." "The boys miss you too," Emma said, acknowledging his sentiment, without directly reciprocating it. "Travel safely." After they hung up, Emma wandered through the quiet house, finding herself in the boys' room. 4 identical cribs, 4 sleeping faces, their greatest collaboration, their shared masterpiece. She thought about David's almost confession, and her deliberate non-response. The careful dance they'd been performing for months. When David returned the following evening, the boys greeted him with enthusiastic hugs and excited babbling. Emma watched from the kitchen doorway, struck by the tableau they created. This man who had once seemed so foreign to her world, now completely at home with 4 toddlers climbing over him, unworried about his expensive clothes getting dirty, or his hair being mussed. Later, after the boys were asleep, they gravitated to their usual spot on the deck despite the autumn chill. "I've been thinking," Emma said without preamble, "about us, this arrangement." David tensed visibly. "Is it not working for you?" "That's just it," Emma replied. "It's working too well in some ways. The boys are thriving. Our co-parenting is seamless. We've created this bubble of family harmony. And that's a problem because—" Emma took a deep breath. "Because I'm not sure if what I'm feeling is real or just proximity, convenience, the natural outcome of raising children together in close quarters." David was very still. "What are you feeling, Emma?" She met his gaze directly. "I'm feeling like the walls I built have been crumbling for months, and I've been pretending not to notice. I'm feeling like maybe there's something here worth exploring beyond co-parenting, and that terrifies me." "Why?" he asked simply. "Because I can't go through that kind of hurt again. Because the stakes are so much higher now. It's not just my heart at risk, but our entire family structure." David nodded slowly, absorbing her words. "I understand that fear. I share it." He hesitated before continuing. I've been careful not to push, not to assume, not to presume that I deserve another chance. But if you're asking if my feelings for you have changed since we created this arrangement, they haven't. They've only deepened as I've watched you mother our sons, pursue your career, build this life with fortitude and grace. Emma closed her eyes briefly. So where does that leave us? Wherever you want it to, David answered. At your pace, on your terms. No pressure, no expectations. Just possibility. That night, Emma returned to her guest house filled with conflicting emotions. The practical part of her brain listed all the reasons to maintain the status quo. It was working, it was safe. It protected the boys from potential disruption. But another part recognized that their careful co-parenting arrangement had evolved into something that increasingly resembled a real partnership in all but name. As she prepared for bed, Emma caught sight of herself in the mirror and was struck by a realization. She was happy, not just functioning or surviving, but genuinely happy in a way she hadn't been since before the wedding disaster. The question was whether she was brave enough to risk that happiness for the possibility of something more. Winter arrived early that year, blanketing their property in unexpected snow just before Thanksgiving. The quadruplets, now nearly 2 years old, pressed their faces against the windows in wonder at the transformed landscape. Their excitement was infectious, prompting David to bundle them up for their first real snow experience. Emma watched from the kitchen window as 5 figures ventured into the winter wonderland. 1 tall, 4 tiny, all equally delighted by the simple miracle of snowflakes. David showed the boys how to catch snow on their tongues, helped them make tiny snowballs, lifted them to touch icicles hanging from tree branches. Their laughter carried through the crisp air, creating a soundtrack to the perfect scene. When they finally tumbled back inside, red-cheeked and exhilarated, Emma had hot chocolate waiting. As she helped William remove his snow boots, she found herself meeting David's gaze over the boys' heads, an unspoken connection flowing between them. This moment, ordinary yet extraordinary, felt like the epitome of what family could be. That evening, after the excitement of the day had given way to peaceful sleep for the quadruplets, Emma and David found themselves alone by the fireplace in the main house. "I've been thinking about what you said," David began, cautiously breaking the comfortable silence, "about not being sure if what you're feeling is real or just proximity." Emma nodded, waiting for him to continue. "I wonder if perhaps there's a way to find out," he suggested, "to create some space to see what's genuine and what's circumstantial." "What did you have in mind?" Emma asked. "I need to go to New York for the company's year-end meetings next month. I'll be gone for a week." David looked at her directly. Maybe that separation would provide clarity for both of us. Emma considered this. "A week apart might be revealing," she acknowledged. "While I'm gone, I'd like to write to you," David continued, "not about the boys or logistics, but letters, real letters, about thoughts and feelings and memories, things we might say if we were starting fresh without our complicated history." "Letters?" Emma smiled slightly. "That's rather old-fashioned." "I know," David admitted, returning her smile. "But emails feel too casual, texts too immediate. Letters require thought, intention, and they create a record of whatever this is becoming." The idea appealed to Emma more than she expected. "All right, letters it is." David's departure the following week created a strange emptiness in their shared routine. The quadruplets were fussier than usual, sensing the disruption to their world. Emma found herself working harder to maintain normalcy, to be both parents, during David's absence. His first letter arrived 2 days after he left, elegant stationery, his distinctive handwriting covering both sides. Emma waited until the boys were asleep before opening it, curling up in her favorite chair with a glass of wine. "Dear Emma, New York feels strange now, familiar yet foreign, like returning to a childhood home as an adult. The apartment that once felt like the center of my universe now seems hollow, impersonal. I find myself missing the chaos of breakfast with the boys, the tiny handprints on everything, even the perpetual sleep deprivation. But mostly, I miss our conversations on the deck, The way you listen, truly listen when I speak. The subtle shift in your expression when you're considering a new perspective. The rare but precious sound of your unguarded laughter. I've been thinking about control lately, how desperately I once clung to the illusion of it. My mother taught me that control was power, that vulnerability was weakness. I structured my entire existence around maintaining perfect control of my environment, my emotions, my relationships. And then came the wedding day, when everything spiraled beyond my grasp. I made the catastrophic mistake of thinking that by walking away I was somehow regaining control. In reality, I was surrendering to fear dressed as self-protection. Learning to be a father to our sons has been a masterclass in the art of letting go, in recognizing that true strength lies not in perfect control, but in how we respond when control is impossible. You've been my teacher in this, though you may not realize it. Watching you navigate motherhood with such grace, adapting, adjusting, flowing with the beautiful chaos rather than fighting against it. I wonder sometimes who I might have become if I'd had the courage to show up that day. But then I remind myself that wandering serves no purpose. This winding, difficult path brought me to a better version of myself than I might otherwise have found. Until next time. David. Emma read the letter twice before carefully folding it back into its envelope. His words resonated with her own journey. The gradual recognition that control was largely illusion, that life's most precious moments often arose from embracing uncertainty rather than resisting it. She responded the following day, finding unexpected catharsis in committing her thoughts to paper. David, your thoughts on control struck a chord with me. I've always prided myself on self-sufficiency, on never needing anyone too deeply. Losing my parents young taught me that dependence was dangerous, that the only person I could truly count on was myself. The wedding disaster confirmed this belief system, reinforced every wall I'd built, justified every guard I'd maintained. I told myself I was protecting my heart, but in reality I was limiting its capacity. The irony isn't lost on me that it took 4 tiny, completely dependent beings to teach me the power of interdependence. Our sons don't know how to be anything, but authentic in their needs, their joys, their frustrations. They haven't learned to hide behind walls or pretenses. I've been thinking about the snow day last week, how perfectly content I felt watching you with the boys. There was a moment when you looked up and our eyes met through the window. Something passed between us then, something I've been trying to name since. Perhaps it was recognition, not of who we were before, but of who we're becoming now. Parents, partners in this shared endeavor, friends forged through challenges rather than convenience. The house feels different without you here. Not worse necessarily, just incomplete. The boys ask for you constantly. William stood at the window for nearly an hour yesterday, just watching the driveway. Even in your absence, you're profoundly present in the life we've built. I don't know what that means yet, but I'm becoming less afraid to find out. Emma. Their exchange continued throughout the week, letters crossing paths, each more open than the last. They wrote about their childhoods, their hopes for the quadruplets, their individual dreams that had been set aside during the intensity of early parenthood. The distance created a space for honesty without immediate consequence, allowing vulnerabilities to be shared that might have remained guarded in person. By the time David was scheduled to return, something fundamental had shifted. Their written words had created a bridge between co-parents and something more, something yet undefined but undeniably present. Emma arranged for Amanda to watch, the boys for David's homecoming. She prepared a simple dinner in the main house, nervous in a way she hadn't been since their early dating days. When his car pulled into the driveway, she resisted the urge to go out and meet him, giving him space to settle back in. He found her in the kitchen, chopping vegetables with practiced efficiency. For a moment he simply stood in the doorway, taking in the sight of her in his home, in their shared life. "You're back," Emma said, looking up with a smile that didn't quite hide her nervousness. "I am," David confirmed, stepping into the room. "Where are the boys?" "With Amanda for a few hours. I thought I thought we might need some time to talk after your trip. David nodded, setting down his bag. I missed them and you, he added quietly. I got your last letter this morning, Emma said, setting down her knife. About building something, new instead of trying to recapture what was lost. I meant every word, David assured her. Emma took a deep breath. I've been thinking about what you wrote, about control being an illusion, about how sometimes the bravest thing we can do is surrender to uncertainty. And, David prompted gently, and I think I've been hiding behind our co-parenting arrangement, Emma admitted, using it as a safe harbor to avoid risking my heart again. But the truth is, my heart has already been risking itself for months now, whether I acknowledged it or not. David moved closer but maintained a respectful distance. What are you saying, Emma? I'm saying I want to stop pretending this is only about the boys. I'm saying I've fallen in love with the man you've become, not despite our past, but partially because of how you've grown through it. Emma's voice wavered slightly. I'm saying I'm ready to explore what we might be together, if you still want that. The emotion that crossed David's face was complex: hope, relief, joy, and a profound tenderness that caught at Emma's breath. I do, he said simply. I have for a long time. He closed the distance between them then, his hand gentle against her cheek. Their first kiss in over 2 years was tentative, a question as much as an answer. But the second was certain, a promise, a beginning. Later that evening, after collecting the quadruplets from Amanda, they sat together in the boys' room watching their sons sleep. The simple tableau represented everything they'd built together and everything they might yet create. I had this all wrong, David said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. I thought asking you to marry me before was the greatest risk I'd ever take, but it wasn't. Not really. I was still the golden son, following the expected path, certain of my place in the world. And now, Emma prompted, now I understand that true courage isn't found in grand gestures or perfect plans. It's in showing up imperfectly day after day, in choosing to stay when things are messy and difficult, in loving someone enough to let them see all your broken pieces. Emma reached for his hand in the dim nursery light. I think perhaps we needed to lose each other to find ourselves first, and in finding ourselves we discovered a different way back to each other. One of the boys, William, stirred in his sleep, his small face scrunching briefly before relaxing back into dreams. Their conversation paused as both parents watched, sharing the moment of quiet wonder that never seemed to diminish, no matter how many times they experienced it. Do you think we'll tell them someday? David asked. The whole story, I mean. Yes, Emma answered without hesitation, when they're old enough to understand that love isn't about perfection, that sometimes the strongest families are built on recovered ground, that mistakes, even devastating ones, don't have to be the end of the story. As they sat together in the gentle darkness, surrounded by the soft breathing of their sleeping children, Emma realized something profound. The control she had so desperately clung to, the careful boundaries, the emotional distancing, the protective walls, had been an illusion of safety rather than safety itself. True security had come only when she'd found the courage to let go, to risk vulnerability, to allow love back into the places that had been most deeply wounded. David's arms slipped around her shoulders, and she leaned into his embrace no longer, afraid of what it might mean or where it might lead. Whatever came next, they would face it together, not as the people they once were, trying to recapture a lost dream, but as the people they had become through fire and transformation. Outside, snow began to fall again, covering their shared property in a fresh blanket of possibility. Inside, a family, unconventional, hard-won, and fiercely loved, slept peacefully under one roof, whole at last.